Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the podcast. Now, we may be laughing, and it's always, as always, is because basically, Ralph said something wildly inappropriate just before coming on. Anyway, this podcast is inspired by a dog walk that I did, right? Because so some of you may know this, some of you may not know this. So I I basically coach a law
my
firm.
dog.
No. I coach
Sorry.
a law firm, and I do a weekly call where I summarise, the themes of the previous week, and then I talk about what's happening in the coming week. And I'm very conscious when I do this. It's a very brief roundup, gets recorded, goes around the whole company and stuff. Very conscious of how depressing I sound, right? In terms of, what's going on, what the implications are, etc. So I went on a dog walk and I was thinking, how can I sound less depressing about the whole situation that the world is in at the moment? And, I'm I would say I'm a very positive person, and I'm always trying to find the positive stuff, even when things are not good. Because I think, I'm a firm believer of the fact that, in sort of generally speaking, if you don't think of positive outcomes, they're never going to happen. I think that if you think of a positive outcome, there are signs of it early. And if you are just blinkered and you think, no, this can't be done, no, it's negative, etc., you don't see the opportunity. Now, maybe that's because, I was a salesperson, right? So I'm always having to sort of, where are the opportunities? However, on this long dog walk, I was really trying, and this was a long dog walk. I was thinking, how is there any good to come out of what's going on at the moment? What is the best case scenario? And it wasn't great. And so I think that in these kinds of circumstances, because no one knows what's going to happen, I think that you have to be in the room, with Donald Trump in the inner circle. But even then, it doesn't sound like he knows what's going on, let alone what everyone else is around him is thinking. I mean, unless this is a part of some amazing master plan, to cause confusion. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to, for the purposes of this podcast, going to try and come up. Well, we are going to come. We're not going to try. We are going to come up with 3 scenarios, right? So we'll go through each scenario as they come. So we're going to go from least likely to most likely scenario, right? So we'll start off with so this is the first potential scenario. So Trump goes all in, destroys the regime, but there's loads of collateral damage. What do you say to that, Ralph?
Yeah, I think that is possibly something that Donald Trump himself, as a person, would be partial to. As far as I read his psychology, and of course I can be completely wrong here, it's something that would appeal to him as a person.
Yeah.
But I think we can make the commentary on that one fairly short, perhaps, because I don't believe that the US administration would do that. I think increasingly we have to be cautious, by the way, of how we use the word Donald Trump wants to do this, that, and the other. Because increasingly I wonder how much of the US policies that we hear coming out of the administration are generated and motivated by him, and to what extent they are generated by the people around him. So we don't know. I don't know. So I'm going to use the word Trump administration rather than Trump himself. However, as I said, I think that would appeal to Trump the person. I don't think it would appeal to the Trump administration so much, because I think we have just seen that this is day 40 or something of the war. So this is like, let's say, 1.5 months. That in one and a half, Yeah,
It is, isn't it? It's
yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
You're
I
like,
believe so.
wow,
Mm. So
wow, it's amazing.
in about 1.5 months, I think, to the extent that I can judge these things, the US have conducted a militarily peerless affair or campaign. It was just politically unmotivated and strategically unsound. The
Mm,
actual tactical way in which they gained dominance over the airspace, etc., was, as far as strategic commentators who know more about this than I think, um, peerless and very good. However, the outcome was mired and messy. And that is, I think, what after 1.5 months the Trump administration will see most in focus, rather than the possible political upside which may come from an overt success, which can be sold as an overt success to the world and more importantly to the domestic base. So I think going all in and angling for or forcing a
mm,
regime change is perhaps something that Trump the person would want to do, but I do not believe the Trump administration will back this, and they are probably going to persuade him not to do this. The second part of this is, of course, forcing regime change. I don't think regime change is easily forced
mm,
externally. I think it has to come from within, as we have seen in Syria, for example. That was a regime change which came from within. It's hard to see how that could have been motivated from external forces. And here it is so again. What I, for example, have completely underestimated is the importance of the Iranian militia. I
mm.
think they're called, apologies for getting this wrong, Bashij or something. Again, apologies.
Yeah.
It's a militia group. There are lots of them, 600,000 or so, and they literally roam the streets of Tehran and other cities and shoot people on sight. Just if they look dodgy to them, which by definition kind of everybody does. And so this creates a
Mm,
atmosphere of fear in Iran, which is clearly not conducive to any conspiratorial movement which may or may not exist.
mm,
And I think that is the reason why we have not seen a resurgence or repeat of recent public unrest in Iran,
mm,
flipping over into a movement that was able to topple the regime. The
mm,
regime is very entrenched, very strong, and one should not underestimate this. So these are the two parts of the dumbbell here. Donald Trump himself, yes, he might be partial to this, but the administration, after 1.5 months of political mess, is probably not. And also the chances of success of regime change, I think, are statistically insignificantly different from zero. So I
mm.
would put this very low.
Yeah. So fair enough. I mean, so basically, the sort of the destruction of a civilization argument is least likely. I guess out of the ones we're talking about. Okay. Oh, and by the way, when we talk about this, we are going to be talking. We're going to try to talk about the specific industries and things that will do well out of this. It's easier to talk about the ones which will do well out of it because there aren't many. Rather than the many that will suffer. But anyway, right, okay, so that's the least likely scenario. So the second one is Trump does a deal with Iran only and then lets everyone else pick up the pieces. So, I mean, given the way he seems to negotiate, he's very transactional, and also he's very bitter about the rest of the world, certainly at the moment. So, is he going to just say, okay, Iran, look, I don't really want to be here. Why don't you and I, we'll do a deal, and then we'll just leave, and everyone else can, as long as you basically don't charge any ships from us, that go through, that's fine. And everyone else, you could do a deal with everyone else, much in the way that his tariffs, for instance. Okay, so That's another scenario I thought may be, and so yeah, everyone else has to pick up pieces. What do you think about that one then, Ralph?
Yeah, I think that's that's certainly more likely than the first one which we discussed. Again, because I believe it is something that Donald Trump, the person, would certainly embrace or favor. And that is also something which I believe the Trump administration would support, because it is, I think, by now clear that the Trump administration does not believe allies are important. This is certainly in the official pages of the various policy documents which are on the internet freely to read, would support. And it is also the actions themselves, if you remember the various discussions, peace talks over Ukraine were all held on a bilateral basis between the United States and Russia. The Europeans were nowhere to be seen.
That's right, yeah.
But most importantly, Ukraine was nowhere to be seen at the table.
Yeah.
And if you think about who might be involved here, I mean, well, the first two parties here you would spring to mind is Russia and Ukraine. You would think. But Ukraine was nowhere there. And J.D. Vance has said these things, and Donald Trump certainly also has said them, is that they will do these bilateral international transactional deals over the heads of others. I'm not sure they use this exact word as an official strategy, but that is what it boils down to. And I think to some extent it reflects a desire to do things effectively, to get something done. And the presence of too many people at the table is seen as a hindrance. But that's just one aspect. That's the nicest aspect of it. I mean, the other aspect is, of course, that America is increasingly seeking hegemonial status, certainly in its sphere in the world, and by extension in the world. And this type of transactional nation-state negotiation is certainly something that the Trump administration favors. So we've got form. So they've got form for this, and I think therefore the scenario which you've been articulating there is much closer to the American negotiation style now, to the negotiation style of New America, if you want, than a diplomatically style which diplomatically involves everybody. So you were wanting to.
No, I was just going to say that in a way it ticks two of the four boxes of his policies, isn't it? It's America first,
yes,
and secondly, no more long overseas wars.
Yeah, so, well, you see, if that really was his policy, then he shouldn't have invaded Iran.
well, no, exactly. I know.
So,
I know.
This is what I keep warning against. I'm going to repeat my warning, not to believe that there is an underlying master plan here. Not when it comes to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
There is one when it comes to the Trump administration, for sure.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But I just think that with that, so that the reason why I'm saying it in that way is that this is a way that he could present it to his domestic audience.
Yeah,
he could say,
fair enough.
America first, because it's just the agreement is between us and Iran, and everyone else can just do their own thing. So he will say, and that's for him is a victory. And then the no more long wars. Well, sorry, everyone. It took a little bit longer than we thought, but, we're out of it now. We're off to Cuba. I mean, we're off home or something, whatever. They can do something like that. Whereas, obviously, Cuba's like shooting fish in a barrel in comparison to what has just happened.
Yeah, but it appears to be on that list, if such a list exists. Yeah. But yes, there's just on as an aside, nothing to do with really our podcast. I just want to take the opportunity to perhaps mention it. In political science, there are two words which are interesting here. One is isolationism, and the other one is non-interventionism. Trust the political scientists to make weird words up. But isolationism is basically what is behind America First. It is a policy that sets America first before all others, to the extent that the interests of others are ignored. Now, typically, non-interventionism is part of that kind of policy. Non-interventionism just simply means that you are not going to intervene in the affairs of other nations, that the autarky of opinion of policy making of other nations is sacrosanct. Well, that's clearly not the case here, because he's invaded Iran, he did a snatch and grab in Venezuela, he puts tariffs on everybody. So this is not non-interventionism. So if it is America First isolation, if it is America First, then this is a policy of isolationism more than others, or a policy that is somehow weirdly mixed between the two things, which you might find if you read a handbook on political science. Anyway, moving on to just a few more comments on this, because what was the scenario again? I mean, he does deal with Iran, yes.
Yeah, it does deal with Iran, yeah.
So I think that would be very much like what in the style of the current negotiation practice of the Trump administration. Where I would pause is just to ask myself, how would this deal operationally be done? Because while the Trump administration may very well want to be party to a bipartisan deal here, there are more countries involved here than just two. And if he says, okay, the US and Iran, we do a deal, we lift some sanctions if you allow US tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, for example, then it kind of would follow, in order to enforce that, Iran would then also have to be given the right to impede the passage of others. And the danger, my alarm bells are starting to ring here, because if you remember the lead up to the talks, which have just failed in the last few hours, was that one of Iran's demands was to be given the right to impose transit fees on passing ships. And if a bilateral deal between the US and Iran were to be struck, you could envisage a scenario where the US basically says, okay, you can have that right, as long as you don't charge us. Yeah, precisely. And if that was to happen as a consequence of our fictional scenario here, that would, I think, be catastrophic, because then what you have is a precedent where a country is given the right by another important country in the world, the United States, to impose fees on internationally open waters, because the Strait of Hormuz is internationally open water. This is not in the nation state of Iran or in the nation state of any of the Gulf states. And if that was to happen, you might very well embolden other nations to do a similar thing. So maybe Yemen and the Houthis, supported by Iran, of course, maybe they would want to do a number on their shores, which is where the Red Sea goes into that Gulf, where you could do very much a similar sort of thing. And all of a sudden you can then say, yeah, but by inference from that particular treaty, we infer the right to do this as well. And that would be a problem. Obviously, I'm not saying that this would be a practical possibility, but it certainly would set a very unwelcome precedent in the body of law, which is loosely referred to as international law, although I know, of course, international law only exists in the actual treaties that define it. But so I think that's just one comment on this. And given that that would be the case, one might wonder to which extent this scenario could be successful. But I would certainly say that's more likely.
There was one other thing that came to mind with regard to the tolls, because at the moment they're saying we want, I think it's $1 per barrel of oil, and we want it to be paid in crypto, right? Now that, in a way, I sort of think, when I saw that, I thought, actually, Trump is going to benefit from that, and this is Trump this time. Trump is going to benefit from that himself, because him and all his family and all his mates, they're up to their necks in crypto.
Yeah.
So actually, if I sort of wondered whether Iran charging in crypto would then mean that there'll be more demand for crypto, because it becomes more mainstream, in that it will be used in reasonable amounts on a very regular basis, will embolden it again. In your scenario, if they go, actually, yeah, let's get paid in crypto as well, suddenly crypto does well, it all starts recovering, and all of Trump, his friends and his family all benefit from strong crypto. And during this time, I mean, anyway, I won't go on, because I think that this is getting, I'm probably going off on one here, but I did think that this is, ironically, this is something that could actually benefit himself.
It's possible. I haven't really thought about that particular angle, but
but anyway, okay. So let's move on to the final and potentially most likely scenario, and that is basically that the Iranian regime stays in power. It just digs in. That's all it does. And so from what's happened certainly today, and obviously this changes from day to day, this looks to me like the most likely scenario, that nothing, the regime is going to be there. It's not going to be removed, and everyone's just going to have to deal with it. So what do you think of that, Ralph?
Yes, that's certainly my favorite. Not favorite as I want it to happen, but that's my pick as the most likely scenario to transpire here. I think we've seen these things before, and I think people call it a frozen peace, which basically just means that the party stops.
That's frozen peace, not frozen peas, not the things that you might put if you bump your head and you might reach for in the freezer. This is frozen peace.
Peace, as in peace out.
Exactly. Just want to make that for those who might maybe there was something wrong with the audio there. Just peas. To make sure we are talking about peace.
Not talking about peas in a pot. Talking about peace.
Peace,
man.
Anyway, please carry on.
Frozen. Actually, I can see why you said that, because I just put frozen peas into a paella just yesterday.
Nice.
Nice. Okay, lovely. So enough cooking lessons.
Yes.
Frozen peas.
You're not going to be able to think of it in any different way.
I can't say it now. It's ridiculous. It's basically just the absence of war. I mean, that's really all it is. It's almost like it's like an anticlimax. I think in literature, it's like an anticlimax. You'll wait for the big resolution, and there's going to be a peace treaty and stuff, and then it's just nothing happens. And this has happened before in Syria, for example. I mean, the parties just kind of not even agreed officially. They just stopped fighting. And there was like an agreement, like a tacit, an unwritten agreement that they're not going to start fighting again. And this is possibly what is going to happen here, I think, because it is going to be in everybody's interest not to continue this. The Trump administration knows this. They would not want to get mired into another Vietnam or into what Putin is experiencing in Ukraine. A long, ongoing, constant engagement that is going to play very unfavorably in the press in America, and unfavorably even in Trump's base, who is already now crumbling a little bit temporarily, but people are speaking out very vociferously against Donald Trump, people from his entrenched base,
Mm.
against the involvement of America in this. And that wouldn't play well. But then also, I mean, if you, and this is the time where I just want to remind you guys of the various points which have been brought to the peace talks, which have now floundered between the various parties. I mean, these I think these were official documents, but you can't find any these documents if they exist, they were never published in the public domain. So peeled all this together from media reports, etc. And as far as I can see, Iran came to the table with a 10-point plan, of which the most important ones were that the US military should withdraw from the region completely, give up all their military bases, that they should recognize Iran's right to develop nuclear weapons and a nuclear program, that they meaning the US, should lift all the sanctions against Iran, and that they recognize that the Iran has a right to control the Strait of Hormuz. Here it is. This is now something which has been emerging as a negotiation chip which just didn't exist before. Before the Iran war, nobody talked officially about the question whether Iran ought to be given a right to control the Strait of Hormuz. This is something to actually realize. I think this is something interesting outcome of this. I mean, this is one tangible outcome which makes Iran stronger than it was before, because it gives them official recognition that they are able to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz in future conflicts. So that's what Iran wanted, and the US responded with a 15-point plan, of which the most important points were dismantling of Iran's nuclear facilities, permanent commitment to develop, not to develop, to refrain from developing nuclear weapons, and it would want to put limits on Iran's ballistic missile program. There was an end of support for Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. And finally, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. And acknowledgement of Israel's right to exist. You see, the US came to the table with a longer list, which also included another party, Israel, which makes this a lot more difficult, because now it becomes a trilateral talk when Israel's interests are being brought into this. And so I think that because it is so complicated and so complex, it's probably just easiest for the US to just step away from it and sidestep all these negotiations. Because as we have now seen, after 20 hours of talks, there was no conclusion. And I don't think, having heard my list of demands, nobody should be surprised that there was no conclusion. Because these things are basically, a lot of them are mutually exclusive. You cannot agree to them. But also I would just like to say that it is sort of possible to just step away from them and say, oh, well, let's not bother, whatever. Because if you think about this idea of recognizing Iran's nuclear program, that's never going to happen. Nobody's ever going to recognize it. And in a sense, to extract a commitment from Iran not to develop it would also be a paper tiger. Because let's not forget, Iran is a signatory nation to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In the 40s, it has given its signature and commitment never to develop nuclear weapons. So in a sense, we already have the commitment and they've broken it. So why we should have another commitment which is not going to be worth the paper it's written on? So that can be neatly sidestepped by basically saying, oh, let's just drop this, because it doesn't really matter anyway. And the Strait of Hormuz, well, that's also just going to be dropped. And finally, the Israel's commitments, that can be excluded simply by saying that, going back to your other scenario, going back to saying, well, let's make this a bilateral negotiation rather than a trilateral. Israel would need to find a conclusion in its own separate deal. We are only dealing with this. And that, I think, is how, in practice, in reality, it would be possible for the US to kind of just walk away from this and allow this to die down. But it would not go away. And that is my point here. If the scenario was to come about, if we get a frozen peace, then we would get a simmering, nervous peace with lots of strategic, with lots of the disruptions which are recurrent. Maybe every month, maybe every 3 weeks, you would get a naval incident in the Gulf, a terrorist attack, something going wrong, an attack on a US military base. The region would never quite go back to the albeit fragile as it was, to the stability which it had before the war. And that would be negative for markets. Markets would not like it. Share prices would not respond favorably to this. But more importantly, I think the oil prices or the prices of the goods which are transited through the Strait of Hormuz would possibly be higher for longer, not dramatically higher, but certainly higher for longer. And that would support inflation and a cost of living crisis or cost of living squeeze, certainly in all countries who are the benefactors of these raw materials, which basically is everybody, but specifically Europe. So this is how I think this most likely scenario is going to translate into the economic reality of Europe and, of course, also of the United States.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is the thing, going back to the walk and the, the conclusion is that there's just no, unfortunately, I cannot, despite being a very positive person and always trying to think of what are the, what the positives are out of any given scenario. It looks to me, unfortunately, like a sliding scale of badness. So there's at the one end, there's the worst case scenario, perhaps that Iran, emboldened by this, makes loads of money by charging everyone everyone wanting to go through the Strait of Hormuz, which then prompts the others to do something like that, possibly China to blockade Taiwan. All these other scenarios happening, I would say, is the bad one. And then at the other end, there would be the complete regime change, someone more amenable to the West and also the Gulf states comes in, has a more of a collegiate, shall we say, approach to things, but that's very unlikely. I mean, that's just it won't happen. So it's just a sliding scale of how bad actually is it. And so in terms of really trying to, bring this down to which kind of industries at the very least are going to do well out of it. I mean, obviously, I'd say the oil industry is going to do well out of it because there'll be higher prices for longer. So OPEC Plus will do well out of it. So yeah, the oil industry is going to do well out of it. I would say that the defense industry is also going to do well out of it because they're running out of everyone's running out of ammo. There's still the whole Russia-Ukraine thing going on, but then because of all this uncertainty within the region, the Gulf states, they're going to be ordering more drones. They're going to, they want to. I mean, someone like the UAE is going to really want to bolster its reputation because I think that for instance, their tourist industry is, for want of a better phrase, shot to pieces for the I would say at least the next year, if not longer. And I think that surely to goodness they're going to recognise that. And I reckon I mean, this is a bit of a side quest here, but I do think that they're going to put a lot more effort into attracting businesses back, people back, to try to help bolster, ultimately bolster the reputation for safety. But anyway, the defence is going to do well because UAE is going to throw loads of money at buying loads of drones, making sure that they are protecting everyone and making it as safe as possible. And bizarrely, in a way, possibly the EV makers, although that's less of a definite positive, because the car makers themselves said quite recently they don't think that this is going to help sales of EVs, because yes, the oil price is going up, and so petrol prices are going up, and therefore people may be thinking, well, maybe now's the time to go electric. But the problem is that the electricity prices are also going up. So net, is it actually worth doing? But that is why we've seen very recently US and UK used EV sales are really, getting much stronger. And I think that is because people are thinking, well, I don't want to shell out for a brand new one because of the high initial costs, but the depreciation of used EVs is pretty high. So actually I could have the best of both worlds in that I get the electricity, I can charge my electric vehicle, and it hopefully will stay costing less than petrol equivalent. But also, in a way, it's like future proofing, because at some point, things are going to come down, and so that's why I think that the used EV sales are getting stronger. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of other areas, hospitality is going to get absolutely mullered. The retail as well. The cost of shipping, cost of materials, all that stuff is going to be bad. And we just, it felt like the world was coming out of a very difficult period. What with COVID, then followed by the whole supply chain disruption that happened with Russia invading Ukraine. Global inflation went up. We were seeing it over the last year to 18 months, sort of coming down. And this year it was finally looking like things are going to turn around. And then this goes and happens. And, it's like the IEA said. They believe that what's happening now is worse than the, 3 previous crises put together. And it's still going on. That's the thing. It's not finished. So anyway, it's a bleak outlook. There are limited upsides here, and I think that because of the difficulties of the last few years, there's limited. It's like retailers. They can't put the prices up that much more, or if at all. Consumer goods companies, they're maxed out. Hospitality, they're maxed out, and then you've got a government in the UK that brings in a whole load of new taxes, charges, whatever you want to call them. It's a very difficult time, and I think that the conclusion of my dog walk was that this is a time where you've just got to get your head down and just get through this, and however you can. In terms of whatever industry that you're in, but whether it's, if you're a chain of restaurants, you just cut the amount. Unfortunately, you're going to have to cut the amount of restaurants. You're going to have to really concentrate. But then that's already been done, So anyway, so that's what I would say. It's amazing what you come up with on a dog walk, but yeah, I mean. But obviously, you've got thoughts on that as well. Not
well,
dog
just
walking,
very few. I mean, as you
Mm.
said, industries which may well do well out of it are the oil industry, but even there one needs to wonder and ask how the oil supply is going to be managed by OPEC in the aftermath of this event, because something which the all Middle Eastern or all Gulf states will have to do is to find a way to immunize themselves as much as they can against the ability of Iran to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz in future, even in terms of peace, even if the peace is frozen. If they are being given the right, which would be worst, or just the de facto ability to somehow extract fees from passing ships, that would very much impede for the worse the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore you need to find alternatives elsewhere. And these need to be built. I mean, there is an east-west pipeline already that exists. I think that has to be reinforced and built out into a series of pipelines. The storage capacity for liquid gas and for oil have to be increased. So there is a lot of, I think, civil engineering projects.
So construction might do okay as well.
Well, civil engineering projects which have to be done in future, and the cost of that is going to find itself into the oil price, of course, as well. And so, yes, the oil industry might do well out of it. This is true, but then clearly also, whenever they do, then they are subject to windfall taxes, which I think is probably also, from a societal point of view, the right thing to do. The everything else is going to suffer, because it's not just oil which goes through the Strait of Hormuz, of course, as we know. It is also fertilizer, importantly, and so the price of groceries is going to go up. It is things that are being used to make copper and other materials, so they are going to go up. The price is going to go up in everywhere. It's going to be broadly inflationary, and then it's going to lead to another cost of living squeeze at the very least, perhaps even crisis. And we know, of course, what that means, because we've just lived through it. It will probably mean that the central banks in European countries are going to see themselves unable to reduce interest rates further. The Bank of England has already signaled 2 increases, rather veering away from its previously envisaged path of 2 reductions. And so you can see where the journey is going here in terms of interest rates, and that's not going to be good for people who have a mortgage, and that's also not going to be good for the United States, because clearly, as we know, the Trump administration would love nothing more to see interest rates coming down, because the national debt of the United States is just crippling and far too high. And so once again, you see that the current policies, it's not a policy, actions of the United States are maybe not directly, but certainly medium term backfiring massively. And all of this is going to lead to, yes, industries, higher prices everywhere, inflation, but also increasing political domestic friction in the United States itself. So I don't know where the journey is going to go, but as you said, it's not looking frictionless.
Yeah. I just had another little thought there, which is, in the UAE, there's this whole kind of NEOM project going on. And over, sort of recently, so over the last year or so, I think there's been a review done of it. And as a result of that review, they've really cut everything back. I kind of wonder whether the parties that were involved in that, maybe they will shift to infrastructure, like you say, the more pipelines. So maybe this could be, whereas perhaps, I mean, this is just pure speculation. I have no idea, but I'm sort of like, companies that were involved in the building there were probably thinking, okay, we're going to have to scale stuff back. Are maybe going to go, right, well, we're going to be able to pitch now for you know, more pipelines and more this and you know, maybe there's that. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm kind of grasping at straws here, trying to sort of think of industries that might, you know, I mean, for want of a better word, benefit from this situation. But you've always got to think of, you know, what is going to happen? How is everyone going to react?
Well,
Because no one's going to just, you know, it's.
I don't think
Yeah.
anybody's going to benefit. To be, there are situations in the world where nobody benefits. Let's just be
Yeah.
honest, and this
Yeah.
is one of them.
Mm.
We're on that happy thought.
Yes, exactly. So, so anyway, yeah. So, the moral of all this is, don't think too much when you're dog walking, because it might, you know, you might find it saddening. But anyway, you know, I'll obviously, you know, we'll always try to bring everyone as much as I can, you know, from the news and the interpretation of it, and you know, we'll just have to carry on, get our head down, and just carry on.
Carry on. That's the
Yes.
spirit. Absolutely.
That's
As an
right.
imported Brit, I would say stiff upper lip and carry
Stiff
on.
upper lip. Keep calm. Carry on.
Exactly.
Anyway, look. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a very interesting discussion, and let's see what happens.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, guys, for having me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. See ya. Bye.